Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
I'm very excited to have our next speaker up here. He is one of the most iconic faces in all of indie game development, the CEO of Spry Fox. He also has one of the most iconic hats in all of indie game development. Please help me welcome to the stage, David Edery's hat.
Hey everyone, thanks for catching my talk. I'm Dave Edery. I'm the co-founder of Spry Fox, and I'm just going to do a quick run through on. I just have curiosity. How many of you have actually played Alphabear? Okay, so about half of you. Cool. I'll tell you a little bit about the development process for Alphabear, and hopefully there's something useful that will come of that. So this is Alphabear. It's a free word puzzle game featuring really cute bears. You collect bears, which have powers, like they give you bonus points in the game and stuff like that, and then you play, and that's on the right side. That's it. You can use any letters that appear anywhere on the board to make words. Letters that are used next to each other become bears, and the bears grow, and they're worth more points as they grow, and blah blah. Anyway, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because it's free. You should just go download it and play it if you haven't already. And the inspiration from this game came from one that we had made 5 years before. It's called Panda Poet, running on that's an e-ink Kindle device. Yes, believe it or not. Most people don't know it, but there was a brief period of time where Amazon was encouraging game developers to make games for e-ink Kindle. It's basically like making games for a pocket calculator. And so we made Panda Poet, and it was super fun. And there were die-hard fans of it who would email us all the time about how much they loved it. But of course, because it was on the e-ink Kindle, which was a complete bust of a platform, it didn't go very far. But we loved the mechanic, and we wanted to do more with it. And so we took another crack at it. The next crack at it was Panda Poet. And this, actually, by the way, you can play today. It's still online on pandapoet.com. But it was basically a multiplayer version of the same mechanic. You would have two people fighting for territory, and if you captured all the letters on the side of a bear, it would grow and it would become your bear. This was an HTML5 game. Google had generously sort of provided us some funding to work on it. And unfortunately, for a whole variety of reasons, some of which were related to HTML5, some of which were related to poor decisions on our own part, the game just really never took off either. So now here's this mechanic that we really believe in, and we failed with it twice. And we thought maybe third time's the charm. Most game developers don't usually do this, but we're thick-headed. So we thought, we're going to give it one more shot. And that's where Alphabear comes from. And the development plan for Alphabear was initially very, very modest. It was like, what can we do in 3 months maximum? And so we, with a very small team, like one engineer, and so the original version of it, for those of you who've played, if you haven't played it, this won't be all that meaningful to you, but if you've played it, you'll understand. There were no bears that you could collect or level up. There was no chapters. There were no bosses. There was none of that stuff. All there was a daily timed mode and a daily untimed mode, and that was it. And so we had essentially 14, events in the game, and you would play them. And the inspiration for this model, of course, was our other game, Triple Town, which I don't know how many of you have played that. It's got about 12 million players. It's a well-known match 3 game, match 3 style of game that we released a while ago. This is another, what the game actually looks like. And Triple Town was also a game that was made in a relatively small time with a relatively tiny team. And it was, by indie standards, very successful. Again, over 12 million downloads is nothing to sneeze at. But it really never made all that much money. And the main reason it never made that much money is on this chart. It's because in Triple Town, there are basically 2 main categories of things you can spend money on. There's infinite energy, which is basically kind of like buying the game. Like, it has an energy system like so many other free-to-play games, but unlike most free-to-play games, you can actually buy out of it. You can pay $4, one-time fee, bang, you never have to wait to play again. And it unlocks some additional modes in the game. So it's a pretty good value. And then there's coins that you can buy that will help you kind of boost your score in the game as well. And that's the consumable, and we thought, we had hoped when we first started working on Triple Town many years ago that was going to be sort of the ongoing revenue source that would make it a healthy game for us. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was 80% of people who spent money would buy unlimited turns, and 80% of the money came from that unlimited turns purchase, and then most people who were paying users would never spend money again. Or maybe if we got lucky, they would buy coins once or twice, and that was it. So coins just didn't end up being the consumable thing that was supposed to be the ongoing source of revenue, just didn't turn into that. As a result, the only reason Tripletown ended up making a lot of money for us is by sheer volume of users. And to be fair, it has excellent long-term retention. Like its short-term retention isn't great because it's a more difficult game than the average casual game. But if you make it past that initial gate, people tend to fall in love with it, right? So combination of excellent long-term retention plus just large overall download numbers meant that it did well for our studio. But given those download numbers, it didn't do nearly as well as it probably should have financially. Tripletown had other problems as well. As some of you may know, it was infamous for being cloned by many, many, many companies. And there were multiple times in the early days where we thought, I wonder if we're just going to get buried. I wonder if we're just not going to have, not even going to have a chance to compete in the market with the game that, with the gameplay that we invented. Anyway, the bottom line on this is that Tripletown did have some success, but the success was largely due to luck. The mobile ecosystem, again, I'm probably not being fair to myself. It's a good game. I believe it's a very good game. But the mobile ecosystem was a lot less competitive when we launched it. It was competitive, but nothing like today. There was a lot of industry goodwill behind it that kind of helped us combat the impact of all the clones. A lot of high-profile people in the industry out there encouraging friends and press and stuff to check out Tripletown, which was really great for us, and we're very grateful for it. We were featured over a dozen times collectively by Apple and Google, and I don't mean like the little features. I mean like the big ones, the ones that drive 500,000 downloads kind of thing. And that's obviously, you can't count on that, right? I mean, that's an enormous amount of luck there. And then we had a relatively low ongoing dev cost. I mean, usually when you have a successful free-to-play game, you have to keep it going, you have to put a lot of people on it. And we just didn't. I mean, Tripletown was fortunately the sort of game, partially by design, again, partially by luck, that really, a single engineer working half-time on it was basically able to make those dozen features happen, which is pretty good, and that most games don't work that way. That's hard. So Tripletown really influenced our thinking a lot in a lot of different ways. We didn't want to. We knew how lucky we were with it, and we didn't want to count on luck again. And when we looked at our plan for Alphabear, this 3-month plan, we were realizing we're basically making another Tripletown. Like we're making a small, tight core game that if we're lucky, if we're incredibly lucky, we'll make a decent amount of money. And that's if we're incredibly lucky. If we're not incredibly lucky, it won't even make decent amounts of money. So around the 3-month mark, where we were supposed to be shipping the game, we started second-guessing ourselves and saying, this is a special mechanic. We really believe in it, even though we've now failed twice with it. We want to do more. I think it's a butterfly flapping its wings. Whether that was the right decision or not, it seems like it was the right decision, but who knew? So we said let's do more. So we started doing some more work. We said let's give ourselves another 3 months. And we said, let's add bears that you can collect. This was a big part. Like we need to give people something that they're excited about, something that they can collect, something that can give them a sense of progression. And then of course it can't just be something you collect that's meaningless. So the bears, once you've collected them, actually boost your score in the game through a variety of things. So here you're seeing an early picture, an early screenshot. The bears were categorized, were sorted by rarity. So common, rare, legendary, which are still the classes in the game, but there was no, for those of you who've played, there were no chapters yet. It was just a bunch of bears sorted by rarity. And the bears had a level. You can see this one, Goldilocks bear is level 1 of 50. You could level it up and it would get stronger. There was no final, again, for those of you who've played, there was no final score bonus yet. So the way it boosted your score was simply gave you a bunch of points for spelling a 4-letter word, or a bunch of points for having 3 bears on the screen, or a bunch of points for using the letter O, or whatever, right? That's how they worked. So the basics were now in place for a collection-based metagame. We also added these things called treasure events. And the treasure events were basically things that you could spend coins on, and they had a small chance of giving you a legendary bear and a high chance of giving you a guaranteed chance of a rare, if not a legendary. And then the last thing is we had these things called challenge events, which would just sit there, and they were super, super duper ultra hard. I mean, they were ridiculous. Like basically there was no chance you were going to beat them in the first weeks, if not, or even months of playing the game, and yet they were always in your face, kind of taunting you. And that was it. That was the game. And so you could basically, again, we still just had these 14 events, the daily timed and daily untimed event that you could play. And you would collect a variety of bears, dozens of bears from them. And eventually, after you had leveled up those bears over the course of months of play, you could eventually beat the challenge event. Or you could pay money for treasure events, get some legendary bears that would help you beat the challenge events a little bit sooner. So after all that work, multiple more months of work, we accomplished nothing. Like, we literally accomplished nothing. Spending on consumables was essentially zero in soft launch. Retention didn't change at all. I mean, like, literally not at all. I mean, we did all this work. The game was fundamentally different. I mean, the core was the same, but everything around it was different. Don't change. Players didn't see the benefits of the legendary bears. They were like, yeah, it's cool that it's a legend. Like, I like the fact that it's called legendary, but they weren't really into it otherwise. They didn't appreciate bear powers in general. So even though a bear might give you, for example, like a plus 100 points for spelling a 4-letter word, people, their gameplay behavior wasn't being modified. They weren't intentionally making 4-letter words as a result. They just didn't care. It didn't feel meaningful to them, or meaningful enough anyway. And players didn't feel any sort of sense of progression, which makes sense in retrospect, right? I mean, the progression was collecting bears, and that's nice, and then waiting, like I said, potentially months to eventually beat this thing that's staring you in the face, and that's not a progression curve. That's more like a slap. so that didn't really work. So, but we didn't give up hope. We said we think we have something here, and so we spent another few months going at it, and that's when we added chapters. And so instead of having just a daily timed and a daily untimed event, now we had a daily timed and a daily timed and a daily untimed event for every day of the week for 9 chapters. So that's 9 times the content, which, as you can imagine, was like, wow, we have to make a lot more content. But fortunately, that wasn't too bad. And that gave us a nice sense of progression, because we could make chapter 1 really easy, and you breeze through it, and then chapter 2's mostly easy, and then chapter 3's less easy, and so on and so forth. And so, like, no longer is it just like, hey, you've been playing the game for 3 days. Here's this challenge event that you're not going to beat for 4 months, which was obviously a broken progression. This enabled us to make it much more gradual. At the end of every chapter, there's a boss. That's a nice capstone, something we didn't have before, kind of like the challenge events. Same sort of idea. It's going to be hard. It's going to take you a little while to beat it, but again, paced appropriately, plus a cute little thing that happens at the beginning where when you first start the event, the boss pops out and says something silly, and great, okay, so a little bit more personality. And then when you beat the boss, there's a nice animation, and the next chapter begins, and okay, great. So now you're starting to get a sense of progression. Very good. The other thing that we did is we added the final score bonus. And again, this was because, as I said earlier, people just didn't care about the bear powers. They didn't seem to feel that they were meaningful. And there were a variety of ways we could have potentially have addressed that. But frankly, it was like at this point we were grossly over schedule and over budget. And we were like, to hell with it. Let's just knock them over the head. So we added the final score bonus, which for this bear, for example, it's 316%. So literally, at the end of the game, your score is this bear, whatever it is, your 1,000 points, this bear increases your score by 316%. There's no chance you're not going to notice the impact of that, right? Like this, you cannot fail to appreciate the power of this bear. And then it also gives you a bunch of bonus points for 8-letter words, which hopefully you appreciate. But at this point, we weren't sure what we could do to ever get people to appreciate the secondary stuff. So like we have both the old secondary powers and this big final score bonus. And after we did all this, we added the chapters, we added the bosses, we added the final score bonus, and a bunch of other stuff that I'm not mentioning. We did a refresh of the soft launch, and now we started to see some positive momentum. We started to actually see some impact, and you can see it partially in this graph, which is intentionally, so comparing to Triple Town, instead of 80-20, we got it to 50-50. This is still not exactly what I want. I'd like it to be more like a 80-20 in the opposite direction, where most of the spending is on coins and, relative to the spending on infinite honey. But this is a much healthier balance than we ever reached on Triple Town. And to be fair, I'm not comparing apples to apples, right? I mean, these are not the same game. Just as one example, maybe infinite honey infinite turns is simply a much more compelling value proposition in Triple Town, and that's why the percentage is off, right? So I can't just say, oh, it's purely because we made consumables a more compelling thing in Alphabear. Like, I'm not comparing apples to apples. But that said, everything, my gut and all the data that I've seen leads me to believe that no, I mean, in general, infinite energy is a compelling proposition in both games, and it's just coins are now that much more a compelling proposition in this versus Triple Town. So that was really good news, and we were happy to see that, and it was one of the first things that actually gave us hope and led to this game actually getting eventually worldwide launched. Interesting thing, side note, you can see in the bottom right corner there, yet again, retention effectively unchanged. So like this game went from a little tiny itty bitty core mechanic that we worked on for 3 months to this monster that we grossly overinvested in for a year, and the retention never fucking changed. I don't even know what to say about that, except for that this keeps happening to our company. And I know with other companies it's interesting. This is not a common thing, but for whatever the reason for Spry Fox, we make a core mechanic. We're usually shooting for some sort of core tight evergreen mechanic, like the one in Tripletown, for example. And a certain number of people like it on day 1, and a certain number of people like it on day 30, and then we spend a year trying to improve it, and nothing happens. And that just keeps happening to us over and over again. And one of the conclusions we've drawn, which I don't know, it may very well not be applicable to anyone else in the world, for all I know. But one of the conclusions we've drawn is that the nature of our core mechanics is such that you either love them or you don't, right? And if you love them, you tend to stick around no matter what. And if you don't, you tend not to stick around. And that's an interesting thing, because that's definitely not true for a lot of other developers working on a lot of other kinds of games. But I guess something about original puzzles is tricky. So anyway, please take that for whatever it's worth. I myself am still struggling with it. I don't know how to interpret it. But and then of course I can't forget to mention, of course, there was the bear speech. So that's for those of you who haven't played, when you're done with your game, we take the words that you've spelled and we randomly plug them into templates that we've written. And not surprisingly, people tend to share the ones that end up being lewd. And in fact, there's really, a fairly substantial, I have no way of quantifying it, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone told me that like a third to a half of our players basically have stopped playing the game for the game and basically are just trying to generate lewd bear speech. Like, it's really, I give you, it's not in here, I should have kept it in here. This should have been the capstone picture. There's a template that does a bear blank in the woods. And as far as I can tell, there's a 99% chance that if you spell the word shit and the word shit gets put into that template, you're sharing that picture. It is unbelievable how often it comes up in the Alphabear hashtag Twitter feed. So people really love this. But the reason I mention it, aside from the fact that it's a core part of the game and I have to talk about it, is the fact that we came up with this idea, I don't know, like maybe the 4th or 5th month out of the 12 months that we were working on the game. And we kind of were like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea, and then we shelved it. And we literally almost shipped without it. And ask anyone who's really into Alphabear, and they'll tell you that it's probably the single most important part of the game in terms of like how much it amplifies the fun and the virality. I mean, we have excellent organic downloads, and it's got to be 98% because of this bear sharing. I mean, people share like crazy. And we almost shipped without it. And there's not really, I guess, the moral to the story on that. I should tell you the reason we finally decided to do it at the very last minute is because we had a conversation with the team. We sat down, we stopped, we said, okay, we've been working on this forever. We're desperate to ship it. It's taken too much time and too much money. But before we kick this sucker out the door, is there anything that any of you are really sad we haven't done, where you're like just genuinely like heartfelt disappointment that we haven't done this one thing that you've been wanting us to do? And this was a really important question to ask, because even though we're just a 10-person company, we're very open, obviously, with each other. It's a family. Like we're a family, and we're very collaborative. But nevertheless, it is also true, I have to admit, that my partner Daniel and I are very loud, very opinionated men. And we tend to drive the direction of the projects, right? Whether we sometimes even without realizing it. And I think we had an important realization right before we shipped the game that, like, wow, we've been basically dictating almost everything about where this project is going to go and taking almost zero feedback from the team. So stop. Does anyone really care? And one person on the team said, we had that idea for bear speech. I'm really sorry we haven't done it. I think that's a mistake. And we were like, okay. And we'll just do it. And that was kind of the unspoken agreement, was if anyone said anything, and whether we agreed or not, we were going to do it. So, okay. So we did it, and holy crap, I think that literally made the entire difference between whether the project was successful or not. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that almost everything else we did essentially pales in comparison to the impact of these damn bear pictures. So I guess the only reason I mention that is because I think it's an important thing to remember for those of you who are like me and, kind of like strong-headed, opinionated managers. Like, it's not a bad idea to every once in a while stop and take a deep breath and be like, would anyone like to tell me what I'm missing? Because in this case, it probably saved the game. I guess You know what? I'll go ahead and stop now, and because I want to give you guys time to ask questions. By the way, I forgot to bring business cards. So if anyone wants to email me, my address is david@spryfox.com. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. When I think of iconic, I think of your orifices. Unfortunately, there is no time for questions, but you can meet your throng of adoring fans back there. Just look for the hat. And thank you once again. That was an awesome talk.
My pleasure.